Hi everyone, so today's video is going to be quite a giant publication update, winter 2022 edition. So I actually don't think I've made one of these videos in nearly a year. I've had quite a few other publications come out. So unfortunately, I don't have the physical copies of most of these publications if they were print publications because I'm currently away at school and they're all at my home. But I'll try to pop up photos of the issues and I'll also link everything. I have also a link tree now that you can check out if you want to click and sort of read the publications. So the first thing I want to note is that I had a poem anthologized in the Rhysling 2021 anthology, I believe. This is the beautiful cover, and I had a poem called We Sell Skin on Sale, which appeared in Augur magazine issue 3.2, be anthologized because it was nominated for that Rhysling award for that year, and they're all science fiction, fantasy related poems. It's the first time I've ever had my work anthologized, and it was very exciting when I received my copy in the mail. So the next publication I wanted to mention was a short story publication for my short story, The Wolf Antelope Will Not Come For Us, which was published in Filling Station issue 76. This was a really exciting publication because this was for their BIPOC writers issue, and I actually read at the launch. It was a couple of months ago, almost like a year ago. So essentially, The Wolf Antelope Will Not Come For Us is about a young girl who caters the funeral of another girl rumored to be killed by a wolf antelope. So I wrote this for my fiction class when I was in second year, so it feels like a lifetime ago when I wrote this story. And if you do want to read it, it is in print. I'm not sure if the issues are still available, but I think they are. So this story, and I will read the particular award name so I don't get it wrong, was recently nominated by Filling Station for an Alberta Magazine Publishers Association award. I'm really happy and thrilled and honored and excited about. So the next publication I want to talk about is for another short story called Where to Run When the Lamb Roars. I'm not sure if I mentioned this sort of an official capacity on this channel, but this short story was shortlisted for the Malahat Review's Far Horizons for Short Fiction contest. If you don't know the Malahat Review, it's this really huge Canadian literary magazine that published one of my previous short stories, Primary Organs, in 2020. And I love the Malahat Review and was very honored to be shortlisted for that award. And I was very happy to find out that it was selected for publication later that year in the Temz Review issue 17. So it came out right before 2022 began, so sort of mid or late December, and it is completely free to read. It is like the fusion of my old short story style, which was a lot of bizarre kind of concepts and kind of more quirky style writing, with my kind of current style, which can be kind of contemplative. Not much happens. The stakes or sort of the concepts are they're kind of lower stakes. They're not such high concept short stories. And this is a strange union of both of those. So let me know what you think. But this short story is about a murderous brother and sister who upkeep their yearly tradition of abducting a young girl. So check out my video on the stories I wrote in 2021 because I had a short story goal to write one every single month and I crushed that goal. And this was one of the stories that I wrote for that goal. And I'm just so happy that it got picked up really quite quickly. The next publication I want to talk about were for two poems that just were released in the Fiddlehead. So I had two poems in their issue 290, which is their BIPOC Solidarities issue. The poems are A Burial and The Night My Mother Learns to Use the Bus. So A Burial, I think I wrote this poem shortly after I finished my second year of university. And I had really just wanted to write some poetry, that didn't have the stakes of going into a workshop. And this is essentially the poem that came out of it. It's kind of a prose poem about a woman who is burying something. The Night My Mother Learns to Use the Bus is a poem I wrote for my second year poetry workshop. And this is quite literally about the story of my mother learning to use the bus, based off a story my mom told me about how she kind of navigated her way home when she first moved as an immigrant to Ontario. I'm really happy that those poems are in the Fiddlehead, which is Canada's oldest literary magazine. These publications just blow my mind. I'm just so excited to have my work alongside so many writers that I look up to and admire. The next publication that I want to talk about is for Fig, which is another short story. It's actually technically flash fiction. It's just under 1,000 words. That was published on Fractured Lit, which publishes micro and flash fiction. Fig is a flash fiction story that I wrote. It was the first story I wrote for my second year like intro to like workshopping course. So it is quite old. It also feels like a lifetime ago that I wrote this story. So this is about two young women who are held in captivity as they prepare a celebratory breakfast after murdering their captors. It's kind of an intense story. I have not read it since I submitted it because I don't read my work after it's published. I never do. I can't unless it's like for a reading or something. So let me know if you like it because I don't know what's in there anymore. Fig is free to read on their website for Fractured Lit. I will link it. So the next publication I want to talk about is for my short story, Slaughter the Animal. I was so thrilled when I got the notification from the New Quarterly, which is such a phenomenal Canadian literary magazine, that they wanted to publish this short story. So Slaughter the Animal has a particularly special place in my heart because it was one of the first, like technically like was from my first like workshop with like an entire class. So this is the very first story that I workshopped, and it was a story that I wrote, oh man, I don't even know when. When did I write this story? I must have written it in 2020. I think I wrote it in the summer of 2020, and I think I've talked about this in a vlog. I think I vlogged when I started writing this story. Anyway, I was feeling kind of down. I'd really wanted to write a short story, but I had no idea, like really, like no idea at all. I couldn't think of anything to write about. So it was in the summer and it was super hot, and I went outside. I like sat down in my family's like hammock we have in our backyard, and I was looking up at the roof, and these birds ended up landing on the roof, and instantly sort of the voice, the first image came by. I had been looking up at these plum trees that I have in my backyard, and my dog was barking because at the time we had like fencing, and all of these images, when you eventually read this story, if you want to pick up a copy, I'm not sure when it's coming out. This is one of my favorite stories that I've ever written, and also I think one of the stories that is a little bit more reflective of like my current like writing style, so I'm really excited for it to come out. So this story follows a mother and daughter whose fraught relationship is tested when they move across the country. So the last publication I want to talk about before we get into the questions for this video is another poetry publication for a poem called What's the Difference Between Good and God? And this is going to be published in the Sick Poetics issue of Contemporary Verse 2, aka CV2. So I'm really excited for that poem to come out. It is literally, it's about what it sounds like. Let's jump into the question portion of this video. So I asked you to submit questions to me on my community tab and also on my Tumblr. The first one is, do you ever submit to a magazine and tell yourself that you've got this one, or I think they will take this? Or do you always expect a rejection and think of a publication as a surprise or a bonus? When I submit my stories to magazines, I don't automatically think it's going to get rejected. So I definitely do think that sometimes like I'll submit a story and I'm like, I know it's going to get picked up by this magazine. An example is with Slaughter the Animal. I had felt quite confident it would fit at the New Quarterly. The New Quarterly was, I think, the second place I had submitted it to, but it was like the first place I had thought of to submit to. Like I've been submitting my work for about 2 years. When I submit something, I do have hopes like that it will be published. And, you know, most of the time it's not, it's rejected. But I find that personally helps with my confidence. Some writers prefer to like assume that it's going to get rejected. So if they do get a rejection, it's less of a blow. How I kind of view acceptances and rejections in the literary magazine game now is that like if I have a submission simultaneously submitted at a magazine, like I think of it as like the magazines are like dueling out for it. So yeah, I kind of try to think of it in a bit more of like a positive spin. There are publications that really surprise me though, like with my story Primary Organs, which was published in the Malahat Review, and then The Wolf Antelope Will Not Come For Us in Filling Station. I was not expecting those publications. It was a huge surprise and a very pleasant surprise as well. I also volunteer for magazines, so I do have some experience like in knowing, and I have a video on rejections, that just because you get a rejection doesn't mean it's speaking on the quality of your writing. So check out the video on rejections if rejections are something that you struggle with dealing with. So the next question is, how do you find publications to submit to? Really what's helped is, I mean, I go to a writing program, so you hear about literary magazines, talking to my friends who are writers who also read, going on Twitter. The thing about Twitter, but Twitter does help with the lit mags because, you know, you might see suggested tweets from similar magazines that you know of and follow, or you'll see retweets or whatever. And I find a lot of new submission calls on Twitter or like on Instagram, but mostly Twitter. I have a list, like a compiled list of literary magazines that I continue to update with more magazines, and I break it down by region. So like Canada, and then I have some American magazines and some international magazines. If people that I enjoy, like writers that I look up to, are published in a magazine, that's another way I find magazines. Contests. I love contests. Like, even though like entry fees can be quite expensive, a positive is that you'll usually get a subscription out of it from that magazine. So you get a really good taste for that magazine for like a year or something. And then at the back, they often have like submission calls from other magazines within that magazine. CBC has a fantastic list of Canadian literary magazines, and they also note which ones pay. How do you find magazines to volunteer with, or how do you reach out to them? So I do volunteer for a couple of literary magazines. I found a lot on Instagram calls, like the magazines will post themselves like, hey, we're looking for readers. Sometimes if I'm submitting to a magazine, I'll go on their Submittable and you'll like directly see an application form. Yeah, but it's mostly social media that I find like magazines to work with, and how I reach out to them is like I'll send an application, and if they get back to me, they'll get back to me, and that's quite nice. And it's been really fun to work at like several of different sizes and stuff to see how things work. How did you come about writing any of your pieces and the ideas for them? Were you inspired to write the pieces by something else, or did they come spontaneously? So I can definitely talk about how I came about writing. Most of the pieces I did mention sort of the journeys of how I came about writing them, so I won't repeat. Was I inspired to write my pieces by something else? No, I don't get direct inspiration like from something else. I'll usually just, like it says in the question, the ideas will come quite spontaneously, and spontaneity in my writing process is so important. I have a video on how to pants for outliners that are interested in getting into pantsing, and I highly recommend checking it out if you kind of want to get an insight on how my writing process works. But spontaneity is where my writing process is at. A lot of the pieces that were published were near first drafts. Sometimes with my writing, I don't like edit them that much, depending on the story. It really depends on the story. So for example, Slaughter the Animal, one of my most revised stories, that one went through quite a rigorous editing process because I didn't really understand short fiction or the short fiction structure when I initially wrote it. So I had to kind of go in and like fix it up quite a bit. Fig is basically the exact same to how it was in the first draft, just a couple of line edits. In terms of the process, I just kind of focus on what the piece needs. I don't like to over edit my work. And, you know, I'm at a point, thankfully, in my writing career, like not everybody can do that. And that's because like I'm at a point where I think I found my kind of my style, and I kind of understand how my writing process works. And of course, this is not like a be all end all. And I'm not saying don't edit your work. I will be posting a video on how to become like a better editor. And I love being an editor. I also like to note that not every piece needs like a complete tear down. I don't personally subscribe to that ideology. The final question is, when writing a story, do you ever come up with a plot detail that could change a little or a lot of the story? Do you go through with the change or stick to the original idea? So I think the asker here is asking, like, have you ever started writing something and you thought you knew what it was going to be, and then all of a sudden like a new idea pops up? Like, do you go through with that change even if it'll completely change the story, or do you like stick to your original plan? I always follow my impulse. Honestly, for me, following an impulse can yield really powerful results. It's happened time and time again. I'm kind of a writer that really relies on her intuition. Intuition is a major part of my writing process and how it works for me. And I've been writing for nearly a decade. And every single time I've tried to stray from that, I've tried to resist impulse. I've tried to resist my intuition. The writing always fails every single time. I have never strayed away from my intuition and had it be successful for me. I think it would be easier like if I could stick to an outline, but my writing process doesn't work that way most of the time. I really want to be following these draws. And I write a lot from sort of my body and sort of my feelings. So I don't want to reject that. If I feel like an impulse to do something, I will follow it. And, you know, worst case, it doesn't work out. Best case, it produces the best work like that I've created. And I find that happens more often than the failure. Sometimes the failure does happen. By the time I finish a story, I realize what I was intending to write. As a pantser, I don't at all ever have an idea of what I'm going to write. And I don't want to. I used to describe it like this. I've talked about this quite a bit as well on my channel, but I used to describe it as the reason why like pantsing or kind of going into work with no idea what the story will be about works better for me is because it's like I'm seeing the story for the first time, so I can see a lot more of the detail. I'm noticing a lot more. Where if I write an outline beforehand of what's going to happen in the scene, I've already been through the scene, and so I might miss out on things, and the writing might become thin, or it might not be fun anymore because I already went through it in my head. That doesn't always happen, but I found I used to write like scene skeletons, like where I would kind of like pre-write a scene, and I found that was just really difficult to work off of after some time because I had kind of ruined or tainted the experience by going through it at first. And I'm not saying that's the process that works for everybody, but at this point, I've been writing for so many years that I understand what does work best for me. So I'm going to follow that process for as long as it works and then adjust as necessary. I mean, you're talking to the person who has changed the genre of fostered like 5 times. Like, oh my God, remember when fostered used to just be a young adult dystopian that was supposed to be one book, a standalone? Yeah, it has turned into a 6-book main series with 2 spin-offs, like, oh my God, 3 spin-offs actually. One wasn't written. One of them is the Mothwork spin-off, and then the other one is Seventh Virtue. Like I've gotten 9 books out of fostered just from following my instinct and my impulses. That's something that I enjoy. Not everybody likes that though. Follow the instinct or the plan or whatever kind of process that works best for you. That's going to be the end of this publication update. Like I mentioned, I have a link tree now in my description where you can check out all of the publications. There are quite a few that are free to read online. Some of them are just print only. I hope that you enjoyed kind of hearing about my publications and an insight into my bizarre little writing process. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another one. Bye.